The following video is based upon true crime content. Therefore, it may contain images and/or language that some find disturbing. For this reason, viewer discretion is advised. Hi, everyone. This is Kerry. Welcome in. I thought since we are in the process of awaiting jury deliberation, now would be a good time to look at key moments in the Colin Griffith trial. And remember, in this video, we're only going to look at what the jury saw. So let's get to it. All right, first off, Colin Griffith is up for first-degree red rum for the unaliving of his own mother. This happened in September of 2024. Prior to that, in February, or it was Valentine's Day of 2023, he unalived his father. Yeah, he unalived his father. A different location. It was in Oklahoma. Judge has ruled at the beginning of this was a key moment. The evidence regarding his father's death, there's no dispute that Colin unalived his father. But what was in question was the motive and self-defense claim. So the judge ruled that they can say he was a suspect in a previous death investigation, but the identity of his victim and the relationship he had with that victim will be suppressed. They also could say that he has not been charged in the death as of now, and they were really wishy-washy about how they closed that out because technically Oklahoma could still try that case. So they were real eggshellish around that one. It's a tough call. But the thing is it's motive. I mean, Colin didn't like being told what to do. And that was something that was a repetitive pattern throughout hearing these different testimonies. Was every time he was told something to do he didn't want to do, he would lash out, or he would call somebody, or he would do something, and it would escalate. Now, they did allow mom's text messages in and Colin's text messages. There were some text messages with Colin's previous attorney from dad's case, which they went back and forth with for several hours, and were trying to decide whether or not that was attorney-client privilege and whether or not they were going to bring that information in. It ended up where they did not bring it in at all. It seemed like every time there was some kind of battle that we felt that there was a right for it to be brought in, prosecution lost the battle every time. And I don't necessarily know if it was his fault. What you also have going against you here is that you had one prosecutor in the case at the table, and then you had two defense attorneys at the table. And in just looking at this case, I felt like, I don't know if it was that the defense attorney was more prepared, or was the defense attorney just more aggressive. It could have just be that they were more aggressive. But they did bring up some good stuff. They got a lot of arguments fought. They got a lot of stuff suppressed that, in our opinion, should have been brought in. And it did help with his defense. But there's still a lot of damning evidence here. So let's watch some of the opening statements.
It was a Sunday evening, September 8th of last year, in Auburndale, Florida. And it was at that time that the defendant viciously and savagely unleashed his full fury and hatred towards his mother upon her, when he stabbed her with such force that the knife went shooting through her neck muscles, through her esophagus, through her trachea, through her thyroid cartilage, and shot out the other side of her neck. You will hear and see that as this happened, she began to bleed, and bleed profusely through the huge gash in her neck. While she bled, the defendant was there and watched as the blood came out of the huge hole in her neck. You're going to hear that he was there as he watched the blood and the life drain from her body until she took her final breath and was officially dead. You're also going to hear that this was exactly what the defendant meant to do, and that this is exactly what the defendant had thought about doing and had wanted to do for quite some time. So much so that he told multiple people, including multiple Charlotte County Sheriff's Office deputies and his own grandfather, the father of the defendant's mother, Kathy Griffith. His name's Robert Willantis. You're going to hear from him. He'll fly in from New Mexico. Live.
It is. That's in eastern New Mexico.
And then,
I'm holding up the other side of the sign.
all right. Did the sign fall down or not?
We held it in place. Kathy and I did a good job that day.
All right. What about 183?
That is Kathy with a huge log of petrified forest. And that is the largest meteorite or a piece of a meteor that impacted in Arizona.
And then final photograph?
That is my birth mother, and Kathy and I. So we have 3 generations there. That was for her 90th birthday.
All right. Now, Mr. Lantis, when the defendant moved back to Florida to live with Kathy, was Kathy happy about that?
She was thrilled.
Now, during the time period when, like, since then, when he moved back to Florida and lived with her, did she try to make up for lost time?
She did.
And what were some of the activities that she and your grandson would do?
They had to catch up on 3 years of school. Colin was 3 years behind. And then they also caught up on the 4th year. So he got 4 years of education done in a single year. That's a huge accomplishment. They went to Australia, Central America, the Caribbean. She wanted to give him.
Now, Mr. Willantis, what was your daughter's profession?
She was a teacher.
And what subject matter did she teach?
Mainly English, but she would do other humanities as well.
Now, tell briefly to the jury about your relationship with your grandson. Did you have a relationship with the defendant?
We would talk on the phone, but I'm not a helicopter parent. I was there to support him and to support Kathy and to love them and be there for them.
Based upon your personal observations, did it appear that the defendant trusted you and would talk to you and confide in you about certain things, grandfather, grandson topics?
Yes.
Did there come a time when the defendant said something to you that was very disturbing to you?
Yes.
Tell the jury about what the defendant said to you.
My grandson was very aggravated at his grandmother and his mother. He said, "I am so tired of these 2 bitches. I'm disgusted." He said, "My mom, I keep thinking over and over, I want to slit her throat. I want her to bleed out. I want to smell the blood. I want to feel the blood. I want to feel the life and the blood leaving her body."
Now, when he said that, what went through your mind?
I needed to take a deep breath and do what I could to discourage that thought, because thoughts become words, words become actions.
What did you say to him in response?
I said, "Colin, I love you, buddy, but you can't have those kinds of thoughts and focus on them and then speak them, because you will cause them to become reality. Please think positive things about your mom, about yourself, and about a good future together."
Now, at any point, did you warn your daughter about what the defendant was wanting to do to her?
I did, but I did not use the exact words because there was so much malice.
Objection, Judge.
Now, explain to the jury, were you concerned that if you used the exact words the defendant said that he wanted to do to his mom, that might negatively affect their mother-son relationship?
It would, and I was afraid it would actually give her nightmares.
Did you tell her a clean version or a more vanilla version, if you will?
Yes, I did.
What was her response?
That he's been threatening her and he's been threatening Susan multiple times with killing both of them.
Now, knowing that, though, did she still want him in the household and wanted to keep having the relationship with him?
Yes.
Mr. Wolantis, you didn't come to Kathy's funeral, did you?
No.
Can you explain why?
The funeral for a person is for those left behind. I will see Kathy in my thoughts, in my mind. That's where I want to keep her. Attending a funeral where her body is placed in the ground, that's not Kathy. Kathy's spirit is elsewhere. The essence of Kathy is elsewhere. She's with me. She's here in this room today with each of you. She can speak to you. She can speak to me.
Mr. Wolantis?
Ma'am?
I asked whether you went to the funeral and why. Just answer that question, please.
You interrupted me as I was explaining why. That you don't like my response, ma'am, that's your problem.
Judge, would you please?
If you would avoid the commentary and ask the question.
I did ask the question, but then he's talking about her being present and speaking to the jury, which is non-responsive.
Sustained as to non-responsive, that portion.
Mr. Wolantis, the pictures showed a trip that you took with Kathy. That was one trip, right?
That's correct.
Have you taken any such trips with any of your other children?
No.
Did you have memory problems, Mr. Wolantis?
With what, ma'am?
Just in general.
Oh, sometimes I might think it was something that occurred a week ago and it's actually a week and a half ago.
But that's the extent of your memory problems?
Usually, yes.
When was it that you say Colin told you that he wanted to slit his mother's throat?
I believe it was 4 months before she was murdered. It may have been before that.
And Judge, I'm gonna ask that he be instructed not to use terms like that. That's for the jury to decide.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, it is up to you to decide whether or not there was a murder in this case. You'll disregard that, the use of that word.
Mr. Wolantis, please tell us the month, if you remember, that Colin supposedly told you the things that you've shared with the jury today.
May
Of what year?
2024.
Okay. And how did he tell you? Was it over the phone or by text?
Over the phone.
Okay. And what's your phone number?
505. This is being broadcast. I really don't want everybody calling me.
Would you shut the feed off, please, for just a moment?
She's going to pull up his phone records and say that he's lying. Yeah, the state does need to object.
All right. Ms. Thorne.
Mr. Wolantis, do you have any other phone numbers that Colin would have talked to you on?
No.
And your certain that the phone call happened in May of 2024, aren't you? Because you said it happened shortly before the presidential debate where Joseph Biden had to later withdraw from the presidential race, correct?
It was before that. How much before that? Was it a month? Was it a month and a half? Could it have been 2 months? Sure.
Irrelevant. When it was said, he said it.
You came to court here in Florida back on January 14th of 2025, correct?
Yes.
And you rose your right hand, swore to tell the truth.
Yes.
Do you remember being asked this question and giving this answer? Question. Now, did your grandson, Colin Griffith, then at some later time make some very disturbing statements to you about what he wanted to do to your daughter, his mom? Answer. A few weeks before the disappointing presidential debate in June, which we can all snicker about, Colin was telling me, and then it goes on to repeat what you said earlier, but
Yes.
you remember saying it was a few weeks before the debate.
Yes.
That's consistent with what he just said, right?
Did you ever call the police about this statement that you claim Colin made to you?
I called the police here. Yes.
Oh, I meant at the time that he made it to you. So in May of 2024, or a few weeks before the debate.
No.
So let's talk about your call to the police in September of 2024. You found out from your son, John, that Kathy died, correct?
Yes.
He called you.
Yes.
At some point after John called you and told you that, you watched a press conference that was put on by Sheriff Brady Judd, correct?
Yes.
And you watched it in its entirety, right?
Yes.
And it was about 20 minutes long, if you remember.
About, yes.
And Sheriff Judd described in detail how Kathy died, right?
Yes.
And it was only after you watched that press conference that you took the initiative to call the police here.
Yes.
They didn't contact you as a close member of Kathy's family to get any information from you, did they?
Initially, no.
Right, you contacted them.
Correct.
So you inserted yourself into the situation.
Yes.
Unless there's something controversial that she's going to get close to the dad situation.
Oh, I know what I was going to ask. Sorry.
I don't trust this lady as far as I can spit.
Mr. Wallantis, how often would you say that you talk to your grandson Colin on the phone?
I don't know. Somewhere between once a week, every 2 weeks.
For what
3
period of
weeks.
time?
It's up to him.
No, I mean, up until when? Like over the months since he had been living in Florida with his mom, every week, every 2 weeks from.
Things dramatically decreased after we spoke at that time.
So you say that it decreased after you spoke with him in probably May of 2024, and he made this supposed statement to you.
Yes.
Did you text with him still or no?
There may have been some. I don't recall every text, every phone call exactly.
So, Mr. Wallantis, can you explain why in Colin's phone records there are a total of 3 phone calls between you two from mid 2023 till September of 2024?
Yes, I can explain why.
Okay. Why?
Well, there's Colin's phone. Colin had an initial phone that his mom got for him. Then he got another phone number. And then often when Kathy would talk, she would then hand her phone to Colin and we'd talk from there. So you have 3 different phones.
Oh, do you know what phone you talked to him on every week up until September of 2024?
On my phone, I know
Right,
that
the
much.
phone- the
Which
phone
one?
that he was using,
He was on one of the 3.
but only 3 calls on the phone that we are all aware of.
No, there's 3 phones, ma'am, not just one.
The records we have. Sorry.
How many know what the records?
Sustained.
And you said that there may have been some text messages. So the text messages that are shown by the records indicate that there have been no text messages between you and Colin since Father's Day of 2023, when he texted you Happy Father's Day. Does that make sense?
Most everything was phone calls. There were some texts since then between one of the 2 of Colin's phones.
Do you know where Colin kept this mysterious other phone?
I don't know about a mysterious phone, ma'am. I said there were 2 different phones he had. He had one phone number, and then he got another phone number. And that was something that he and Kathy arranged.
And this is something that Kathy told you.
No, he had one phone number, and I put it in for Colin Griffith. Then he told me that he had another phone number. His mom got him a different phone. So I put that phone number in, and then Kathy's phone. So that's the 3 phones.
I don't have any other questions.
She couldn't flip it. She couldn't make him look bad. I love it.
Mr. Rolantis, the defense said that you inserted yourself into this situation. Do you recall that?
Yes,
You are the deceased victim's father, correct?
yes, I am.
Did you insert yourself into anything voluntarily?
When Colin and I spoke about that disturbing phone call, I told him that if anything happened, I would be talking with people officially instead of being quiet.
And does it make sense that the murdered victim's father calls law
Sustained.
excuse me, does it make sense that
Objection. It's calling for speculation.
Let me hear the question. Don't answer the question until I say so.
Yes, sir.
did it make sense that the deceased victim's father would contact law enforcement with important information as you did?
Sustained. It's for the jury to decide, Mr. Williams.
Now, when you called law enforcement on September 23rd of 2024, you told law enforcement the disturbing violent statement that the defendant made, correct?
I did.
I have nothing further.
Thank you.
To teach her son about responsibility and respect. A bit of time progressed. He moved back to Florida. He had been living with his dad for a number of years in Oklahoma, approximately 3 years or so. While he was living in Oklahoma with his dad, his mom lived in Florida in some different places, but including Port Charlotte most recently. And you're going to hear that while the defendant lived with his dad, the mom, as any mom would, greatly missed her son. And she didn't get an opportunity for different reasons, including a very controlling dad that the defendant was living with. So Kathy Griffith basically didn't have much contact with her son, not because she didn't want to, but she would try to call him and talk to him. And it pained her greatly that her son was not with her. You're going to hear that there's another brother, an older brother. He really doesn't have much to do with this case, but nonetheless, There was an older brother who lived with his mom, Kathy, for a period of time before he moved out of the house when he was old enough. So as the defendant moves to Florida, his mom wanted to make up for lost time. That was 3 years, 3 critical years of her life and his life when they didn't do mother-son things. They didn't spend time together. They didn't have all those opportunities that maybe other kids and other parents had. So Kathy, the defendant's mom, tried to make up for lost time. And she took her son on multiple vacations. They took cruises. They went to Disney World. They traveled out of the country. They went to Washington, D.C. And she spent all her time and affection and money on the defendant. That was her son. And that's who she had missed for all those years. Now, was Kathy Griffith the perfect parent? No. Was she the perfect person? No. But nobody is. But you're going to hear that she gave everything that she had, including her life, to try to take care of the defendant and spend as much time as she could with him, even at the cost of her life, which ultimately is what happened. Now, as the defendant and his mom lived in Charlotte County, in Port Charlotte, they lived in a house, a well-kept house. It was the two of them. And they did plenty of things together. Like I said, they went on vacations. They went to the movies. They hung out. It was just the two of them. So they had nothing but basically one-on-one time. And you're going to hear that Kathy Griffith, like any mom, expected certain things. These weren't off-the-wall, dictator-like things. These were simple things that she thought would be appropriate to teach her son about responsibility and respect. Chores, minimal chores, such as weed whack in the backyard, taking trash and food or candy out of his room, helping her around the house with whatever little odd jobs might happen. But you're going to see in here, the defendant wanted nothing of that. He didn't want to be inconvenienced. He didn't respect his mom. He didn't care about his mom. And wherever this deep-seated anger and hatred came from, it was real within him. And he told people about it. So as the days turn into weeks and weeks turn into months, his anger, as you'll see, was building and building.
Judge, I'm going to object to this being argumentative.
As the time went on, you'll see that the mom had to deal with a lot of issues, including being attacked by her own son. You'll hear a little bit about the defendant being arrested at a certain point for domestic violence battery. He was a juvenile, as he still is a juvenile. And you'll hear that he was put on some probation. But in essence, he was not happy with his mom. So he took her down on the ground and stomped on her hand. But they continue to live together. The mom, you'll hear, was afraid of the defendant and what ultimately might happen to her. And she was afraid he would kill her. But she loved him. And you're going to hear that she wanted to be with him. And she was cognizant of the fact that when he turned 18, he was probably going to leave the house. And that would, for all intents and purposes, end that one-on-one time. And he would continue on with his life however he saw fit. So it wasn't like every day was chaos or bedlam in the house, but the defendant had issues, the mom had some issues, but they were working through them. Now, sometimes they would go to the movies together, sometimes there would be good days, and you're going to actually get to see kind of like an inside peek of some time on September 7th and September 8th, the day that the defendant killed his mom. You're going to see that in the form of Ring camera footage that Kathy had set up inside because she was so afraid of what her son might do to her. And you're going to see that there was cameras set up in different parts that basically captured the same or similar things, but you're going to get to see some footage from a kitchen camera that captures the kitchen as well as into the living room. So you're not going to have to sit through 48 hours or 72 hours of just nothing happening, but you're going to see some clips so you can kind of tell what the vibe was on those last 2 days of Kathy's life. You're also going to get to be able to see the timeline as it continues. We talked a little bit about jury selection, about a timeline, because nothing happens in a vacuum. So as the defendant's living with his mom, he starts making these statements that he wants to kill his mom. And that if he has to go back to his mom, he's going to kill her or do her harm or do himself harm. And he tries to make accusations against his mom that you'll see she was never arrested for anything as it pertains to the defendant. But nonetheless, he starts telling detectives, he starts telling deputies. And so the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office has different units, as does a lot of law enforcement agencies. And you'll hear that they took a proactive approach because they didn't want to see anything bad happen to the defendant, and they didn't want to see anything bad happen to the mom. So you'll hear that there were multiple deputies and detectives that would check in on the family, would check in on mom, would check in on the defendant. And their goal was to try to ensure that both parties got along and that, of course, they lived long, happy lives together. It didn't work out that way, not from a lack of their trying. So as the year continues, the defendant, as I mentioned, got arrested for the domestic violence battery. He got Baker acted a time or two. And when he would be about to be released, he would make statements. He would say he didn't want to go with his mom. If he went with his mom, he was afraid of what might happen, of his anger, that he would kill his mom. He also made statements that he was afraid that she would do something to him. But the reoccurring theme that you will hear from the witnesses from the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office is that the defendant verbalized what he ultimately did, which is that he would kill his mom. You'll hear from one or more deputies that even asked him, well, how are you going to do that? And he specifically mentioned, sometimes he would mention different things like shoot or stab, but a reoccurring theme was he would mention that he would stab his mom. So the intervention continued with the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office. They would talk to both Kathy on the phone, the defendant on the phone. They were accessible. They would call and check in. They would stop by the house and talk. And the defendant and his mom independently, they had the ability to call the deputies and the detectives as well. Now, 2024, around February 19th or so, around that time, or perhaps a little bit earlier, the defendant sent a text message. He had many communications with an attorney that was
I'm going to object based on you don't know if this is going to be admissible.
Approach.
And the sidebars begin. That's the one thing that's going to slow this trial down. There's going to be a lot of sidebars, I have a feeling, just because of how they're going to have to tiptoe around the father's death. I'm surprised that the prosecution hasn't mentioned the fact that mom bought him a brand new car when he graduated. Come past your house the other day. I watched them to make sure they kept going.
You know.
Here we go. Okay. I'm going back on mute.
You may continue, Mr. Levine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, continuing on to some of the statements that the defendant made that explicitly forecasted what he did on September 8th of 2024. I mentioned the name Robert Willantis. Robert Willantis, as you'll hear, was Kathy Griffith's father. He's the maternal grandfather of the defendant. You're going to hear that Robert Willantis, of course, had a relationship with his grandson, loved his grandson, cared about his grandson, and still does. And the defendant told him something that was super, super disturbing, to say the least. You will hear from Robert Willantis that the defendant said to him that he wanted to kill his mom and how he was going to do it. And the defendant said, more than anything else, I want to slit her throat and feel her bleed out and feel the life leave her body. That's how much I hate her. You're going to hear that Mr. Willantis, needless to say, was absolutely shocked. And he told his grandson, that's sick, that's twisted, you can't do that. You know, you and your mom have issues and you're going to need to work through those issues. September 7th of last year. The morning started with Kathy buying her son, or letting him use her credit card to buy Starbucks. Bought a couple drinks, a breakfast sandwich, and the defendant came home. And this is going to be some of the ring footage that you see. So you'll be able to see some of these interactions. And you're going to see the mom and the son and some about how they're talking to each other and kind of what happened that day. The mom had minimal requests of the defendant. On that specific day, she wanted her son to help her put up a bookshelf. The defendant didn't want to be bothered. The mom wanted her son to weed whack the backyard. The defendant didn't want to be bothered. The mom wanted her son to clean up the food and the candy that was in his room, attracting ants, but the son didn't want to be bothered. You'll see that he had his Starbucks, he had his sandwich, he wanted to do what he wanted to do, which was he wanted to take a walk, get out of the house and exercise. So the end of the day, or sometime during the day, the end result is that the mom got fed up with him. Kathy was sick and tired of being disrespected, sick and tired of doing everything for her son, and basically told him, get out until you can show me some respect. Well, the defendant had no problem with that because he just wanted to do what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it. So he went to his grandma's house. So that's how the defendant and his mom in Charlotte County, how their lives come to Polk County. Because the defendant's grandmother, who is Kathy's mom, her name is Susan Detman. Her and Robert Willantis used to be married back in the day. She had multiple houses, one in the Keys, one in Auburndale, and perhaps one somewhere else too. So the defendant got in his car. It was a nice Volkswagen black four-door. You'll hear and see that the mom had a white four-door Volkswagen. And the defendant the defendant drove to his grandma's house in Auburndale. And you'll see and hear at his grandma's house, he didn't have to put up with his mom asking him to do things or to be respectful or to do chores. You also hear that during the relationship between Kathy and her son, she got him video games. She got him a phone. She let him use her credit card to fill up and use his bank card to fill up gas. She provided food. Of course, she provided shelter, clothes. I mean, the basic necessities, but she did more than that. The defendant you're going to hear and see is a very smart individual. He was in high school and was, I believe, taking college courses and had an interest in the law. And you're going to see that he was a fairly smart individual, and he would use that knowledge to try to do certain things. So on September 7th, the defendant leaves. The mom is at home, and the mom's angry. She's not happy. Does she want to hurt Colin or kill him or do anything to him? No. She's mad because she knows that her time with her son is slipping away. He's 17 years old by now. Incidentally, he was almost 16 when he killed the individual in Oklahoma. Now he's 17 years old on September 7th and September 8th. So mom is not happy because he's disrespecting her. He's not doing the chores. She's busting her rear end doing everything for this kid who's ungrateful, and she's mad. But nonetheless, she wants him home. She doesn't want him with her mom. She doesn't want him out running the streets or not knowing where he is. So she continually texts him and calls him. Her only desire is to get him home, not to be mad at him or hurt him or ground him. She's willing basically to bend over backwards, as you'll see from the evidence, to just be with him. That's what she wants, is just time with him. You're going to get to see through text messages between her and him, her state of mind and what was going on. And the defendant was basically just blowing her off. He didn't want to be aggravated. But you're going to see kind of the mom was frantic. And once again, frantic in terms of being a mom and wanting to know where her son was and wanting her son back in her house. So she started to give him ultimatums, things that she wasn't going to follow through on. Some of the things. She was hoping not to have to follow through on any of these things. But you're going to see that she was saying, if you don't come home, I'm going to sell your car. If you don't come home, I'm going to cancel your insurance. I'm going to turn off your phone. And she would turn off the phone that she provided for him multiple times. She would turn off his phone. She would take away his computer. All things that she bought. She bought him a computer for school. She bought him a phone because, of course, that's what parents do. And you'll see when you're a child, you can't get a cell phone with AT&T or have an account with AT&T if you're not 18 or older. So he was relying upon his mom, and happy to do so, because she made sure that he had everything that he wanted. So she was saying these things because basically she was hoping that he would be afraid of them and would come home, but he could care less, as you'll see. But then the Oklahoma killing resurfaces. And you're going to see that besides just pure anger and hatred towards his mom, that his motive, an additional motive for killing her, was what she texted him. Because he was concerned that Oklahoma killing was going to come back around. Of course, it was still under investigation and still is, but that was going to be reopened. And you're going to see firsthand why the defendant didn't want that to happen and why that just infuriated him even more towards a mom that he hated and couldn't stand for no good reason. You're going to see firsthand that Kathy texted her son between 12 and 12:29, and he received it. And she texted him, Colin, the recordings of you admitting to killing, and then she stated who it was, and planning the murder. There are 4 different instances from my Ring camera, are all going to Bob, Susie, Amanda, and Chris at 3 p.m. today. And mind you, this is the day that he murders her, shortly thereafter. She continues on, plus the recovered audio from Chuck's iCloud. Chuck is the defendant's father, Kathy's ex-husband. So Kathy continues on, plus the recovered audio from Chuck's iCloud, where you told your dad you hated me and I was an evil bitch, are being sent too. My dad is sending me his recordings of you telling him how you planned my murder back in February. Audio, video, emails, texts, and phone records are all being sent. For the record, no, you cannot have a single one. Your attorney can request them. She continues on, all because you didn't want to help me mount a bookshelf that took under 30 minutes. Weed eat the backyard and clean your room because bugs were in the candy you had all over. Remember, you chose this. You have 10 minutes to call me and fix this, Colin. When the defendant read that text, his anger level just rose even more. Later that same afternoon, Kathy pressed it even more. And she sent a text to her mom, Susan Detman. And mind you, the location where the defendant had run to was Susan's house, his grandma's house. She was down in the Keys at one of her houses, so Colin had free range of the place. Hey, no rules, nothing to do. He could do whatever he wants to do. Nobody's even there to supervise him. And that's why he would like to go places where there were no supervision. I mean, specifically his grandma's. So Susan was in contact with the defendant because she was driving up from the Keys, and the defendant was staying at the house there. So Kathy texted Susan a similar text message. And she texted her mom, Colin's grandmother, tell Colin the recordings of him admitting to killing, and then she stated who the person was, and planning the murder. There are 4 different instances from my Ring camera, are all going to Bob, Susie, Amanda, and Chris at 3 p.m. today. Plus the recovered audio from Chuck's iCloud where Colin told his dad he hated me and I was an evil bitch are being sent too. Dad is sending me his recordings of Colin telling him how he planned my murder back in February. Audio, video, emails, texts, and phone records are all being sent. For the record, no, you cannot have a single one. Your attorney can request them, so can Colin's. You're going to see that afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, in an eerie video, Kathy changes her clothes. I mean, you're not going to see her change her clothes, but you're going to see she appears in the exact clothes that her son would kill her in just mere hours later. And you're going to see that she had on some blue jean shorts. She had on a black t-shirt with a coffee motif. And she had a nice leather purse / backpack over her shoulder. And she left the house. And she was not happy. She was not happy at her mom. She was not happy at Colin. But she had one thing that she wanted to accomplish, which was not to do her son any harm, but to get him home so they could continue being mother and son. So she made the drive from Port Charlotte to Polk County. And you're going to hear that at a certain point, she arrived. Sometime in the ballpark of 5 o'clock, shortly before the defendant would murder her. Now, there were 2 ladies across the street in separate houses, but you have the grandmother's house on one side of the street, and then basically the 2 neighbors that lived across the street from the grandma, two nice ladies you'll hear from. But they both kind of independently saw and heard things. And you're going to hear that at around 5 o'clock, and one of the witnesses, I believe it was Miss Sally Bell, she remembers the time frame because she was about to leave for church. And she and her husband, you'll hear that they always like to leave right around 5 o'clock or touch before 5 in order to get to church and to talk to people and get a seat. So around 5 o'clock, these 2 ladies, Sally Bell and Nancy Jones, independently, they're just at their houses. They see Kathy and they see the defendant, and they're having an obvious argument. They also see that Kathy is not doing anything violent to the defendant, but she's animated, and the defendant is animated. And then they saw the defendant grab his mom by the hair and start dragging her from the driveway carport into the house. And as that happens, Kathy is telling her son, Colin, stop, let go of me, you're hurting me. And that's the last that those 2 neighbors saw of Kathy Griffith. That's the last anyone would see of Kathy Griffith alive. You're going to have an opportunity to see crime scene footage and crime scene video. And you're going to see that the violence continued and started on that day when the defendant grabbed his mom by the hair and dragged her into the house as she was saying, let me go, Colin, you're hurting me. You're going to hear and see that this mom was doing nothing violent or physical to her son, who she took care of and loved. But the defendant thought it was all right to grab his mom by the hair and yank her into the house. Well, what happened on the way to the house? Kathy, one of her AirPods falls out. It falls in the mulch. The defendant drags her into the house, infuriated. Another earpod falls out of her other ear. You're going to see photos that Kathy would wear AirPods a lot to talk on the phone, listen to music. You're going to hear as he dragged her and was furious. You're going to see her AirPod case falls in the living room as he continues to drag her to the back of the house, letting his anger and rage come out. You're going to see the crime scene of that brutal, vicious, savage killing that I mentioned at the beginning of the opening statement. You're going to see pictures of Kathy who came out of her flip-flops as the defendant was attacking her. You're going to see photographs of a charger that is strewn about on the floor from when the defendant was attacking her. You're going to see that same brown leather backpack / purse that was over her shoulder when the defendant was attacking her came crashing to the ground. And you're going to see that it's got blood all over the place. That when he stabbed her, she was still holding it. There's blood on the outside. There's blood on the inside. There's blood on the front, on the back, on the wallet. And you will see firsthand the carnage that Kathy suffered as she laid in the pool of blood that came out of that deep gash in her neck, compliments of her son, Colin Griffith. When all the evidence is in, ladies and gentlemen, you should come to one conclusion. That being that the just verdict is holding the defendant responsible to what he chose to do on September 8th of 2024. And that just verdict, based upon the evidence that you will see and hear, is that you find the defendant guilty of both first-degree murder and kidnapping for the crimes that he perpetrated on his own mother. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Does the defense wish to give an opening statement? You may proceed, Ms. Thornhill.
Good morning. You're probably expecting me to say something very different from what Mr. Levine presented, and you'd be right. I'm going to start by introducing some of the people that are a part of this family and whom you will hear from. You've heard some of their names already, but I think it's helpful if you know the relationships among them. So first we have Colin Griffith. Obviously, you are aware of him. He's 17 years old. Catherine, or Kathy, as she's known, Kathy Griffith, is Colin's mom. And tragically and sadly, she is no longer with us. Susan Detman is the third main person who is involved in this saga. Susan Detman is Kathy's mom and Colin's grandmother. Christopher Griffith is Colin's older brother, so son of Kathy and of Charles Griffith, who goes by Chuck sometimes. He was born when Kathy was very, very young. She got pregnant when she was 13. She gave birth at 14. Colin came along a few years later. You've already heard about Robert Willantis. He is Kathy's father and Colin's grandfather. You heard he lives in New Mexico, and he has for many years. He's sort of removed from the family a little bit. Some other names you may hear are Christy Rooney, who is Kathy's older sister, oldest child of Susan and Chuck. John Paul Willantis, who is the younger brother of Kathy, also the child of Susan and Robert Willantis. Susan is now Detman. Finally, there is Nikki Markovich, who is now Susan's husband, and Kevin Markovich, who is the son of Susan and Nikki. So the half brother of Kathy and the half uncle to Colin. Okay. I might should have drawn a family tree, but at any rate, this family, like a lot of families, at times is very close and at times has its issues. You'll hear about these cruises that multiple family members took together, but you'll also hear about estrangements and fights. The common denominator in the estrangements and fights, Kathy Griffith. She is the person who is periodically, or for really long periods of time, estranged from any number of those people that I have mentioned. You heard that she lived separate from Colin for many years. That was after her divorce from Charles Griffith. With Susan, the other main player who you'll hear from, it depended not on the year or the month, depended on the day and sometimes even the minute, whether Kathy was communicating with Susan or whether she was telling Susan she never wanted to hear from her again and that she was dead to Susan, or that Susan was dead to her. Susan was a regular part of Kathy's life because she lived in Florida and close in Florida. Susan periodically stayed in Charlotte County. You heard about some of her other homes. She travels quite a bit, some for work, but for a variety of reasons. But she is the constant in Kathy's life. Always there when Kathy needs something, especially money. Some of the things you heard about that Kathy provided for Colin, according to Mr. Levine, were actually provided by Susan. Susan paid for every single trip they took, and that Kathy chose to take. Susan would pay Kathy's phone bill sometimes. At any rate, Susan was the constant. She will tell you about Kathy's personality. She'll tell you about her mental health problems. She'll tell you about Kathy's drinking and misuse of pills. She will tell you about Kathy's threats to commit suicide over the years, but not just threats. She will also tell you about the several attempts Kathy made on her own life. Beyond that, you're going to hear that Kathy not only wanted to cause harm to her own self, but Kathy has threatened or done harm to other people. You'll hear some of those details about some of the things that she actually did to another person in front of Colin, involving weapons. You will hear that she has threatened to kill different people at different times and actually taken steps towards completing that wish. You also hear that Kathy is not exactly reliable in what she says. You'll hear this from her own mother, that she makes things up, that she is unpredictable, she is erratic, and goes into rages. As I said before, Kathy has been or it was still estranged from multiple family members at the time of her death. I won't go into the details now, but you will hear about some of those details as well. So let's go back to September of 2023, now that I've sort of laid the scene. The family went on a cruise in September of 2023. Susan paid for it. It was Susan and Kathy and Colin and Kevin, and I'm not sure if anybody else went or not. Kathy got upset on that cruise. You'll hear that Kathy, according to her own mother, if somebody doesn't do something that she expects them to do, she gets very angry. And in this particular situation, Kevin and his girlfriend was also on the cruise. We're supposed to meet her at 8 o'clock to go to some activity on the cruise. And apparently Kevin and his girlfriend were late, and Kathy got really upset and started saying that they lied to her and that she was done with them. And she ended up getting her own room for the last night or two of the cruise to be separated from everybody else. You'll hear that as Kathy and Colin were driving home from the cruise, and Kathy's already mad, at least according to Susan, that Kathy was also upset with Colin. You'll hear a variety of things about why she was upset with Colin. You'll hear that she claimed that he was failing a class, and that's why she was mad at him. He wasn't ever failing a class. Every single screenshot on the phone records that show his grades show A's and a B or two. Colin graduated early from high school with college credit. He was not failing. You may hear that Kathy was upset with Colin because he had an appointment set up with, he was dual enrolled too. So he had, high school teachers, but also college professors. She got upset that he said, "Oh, I have an appointment with one of my teachers or professors," and she was mad that she hadn't been told that in advance. There was a disagreement. So either on the way home or when they get home, you'll hear that Colin told this to police later, by the way, that my mom handed me an envelope and said, "Here are all the important papers you'll need if I'm gone." Then they are inside the house, and Kathy got her gun. The gun that she has owned and lied about whether she had it in her house or not at a variety of times, and pointed it at her son and said that she was going to either shoot him or herself or both. And then she handed the gun to Colin and said, "Just shoot me." She's ordering him around the house. At one point sends him outside and says, "When you hear the pop, you can come back in." Makes him sit down outside her bedroom, cross-legged. When he didn't want to sit cross-legged, she said, "You're going to sit cross-legged," with the gun pointed at him, while she sits on the bed. At some point, Kathy, I guess, decided not to go through with whatever her plan was. And in her erratic and unpredictable way, she put the gun away and drove Colin to school. So Colin goes straight to his teacher and says, "My mom just pulled a gun on me. She threatened to kill me. She threatened to kill herself. I'm scared." So the teacher immediately goes to the school resource officer, and they get the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office involved. Colin repeats to multiple people, his teacher, the SRO, the sheriff's officer, deputy that comes. And they did send someone to Kathy's house because they were doing this investigation. And Kathy won't open the door. She didn't want to speak to the officers. Eventually, they convinced her to speak with them. She said she'd had bad experiences with law enforcement in the past. She finally says, that never happened. Colin's just making it up because he's upset that he was failing a class and I took away his phone and his AirPods because he's failing a class. Okay, so divergent stories, right? Sheriff's deputies go back to Colin at the school and say, your mom says this never happened. She says you're just mad at her and made the whole thing up. And Colin is like, no, it happened. This is what she did to me. She has a gun in the house. They didn't believe him. They believed Kathy. So when he repeats now to DCF staff members who are investigating, and he tells all of these details too, and the DCF worker has access to all of the prior DCF reports that exist from Florida that uniformly talk about Kathy being violent with others, Kathy not being protective of her children, Kathy threatening to or committing violence on other people. Despite all that, they believed Kathy. Colin repeated again and again, I am scared to be with my mom. If she does something to me again, like pull a gun on me, if she attacks me, I will defend myself and I may hurt her. So they put Colin in a Baker Act facility for those statements. Interestingly, Kathy, rather than being relieved that her son, who allegedly threatened to kill her, is in a safe place, does everything she can to not cooperate with the people in the Baker Act facility, the sheriff's deputies, DCF. They insist, because of what happened in Oklahoma and because of what he said his mom had done to him, and because he said, I don't feel safe going home because I'm afraid of what she might do to me again and what I will do in response, that he was safest in this facility. Kathy won't sign medical release forms so they can get more information about the family. She won't approve any medication for Colin. And then she hires a lawyer to get him released from the facility against all advice. When they were getting ready to release him to Kathy, he says, do not send me home with my mom. I am scared. She threatened me. If she comes at me, I'm going to defend myself. So they put him back in the Baker Act facility. By the way, they find out she does have a gun. Like, she owns the gun. Colin tells DCF, I would rather go into foster care than go back with my mom. Because he didn't feel safe with her. Eventually, after you heard about the special unit from Charlotte County Sheriff's Office that got involved with the family, this is when they get involved. And you'll hear about either Corporal or Detective Rentis. He's a male. and Detective Lacey Zanoniani. A lot of times she's referred to as Lacey. Or Detective Z. But they start getting involved with the family. They're making suggestions to Kathy about how to handle this situation, and she is fighting against them in any way she can. She eventually Kathy tells Detective Zanoniani that Colin is going to this place called Sandy Pines, and he's going to be there from between 60 and 90 days. They're going to work on a treatment plan for the trauma he has suffered, for the statements he's made. But after 3 days, Kathy checks him out of Sandy Pines against medical advice. There's a family meeting where Kathy admits to pulling a gun on Colin. But everybody in the family says, nope, Colin's going home with mom because mom was insisting on it. It's her way or the highway. So that happened in September of 2023. Next you'll hear is about the November 2023 incident where Colin ended up getting arrested. What you're here is, once again, diverging stories about what happened. On November 12th of 2023, Colin called the sheriff's office. He may have even called Corporal Rentis. Okay, so he is reaching out. He is being forthcoming. He says, my mom and I had a verbal argument. I left the house because I'm scared. She told me that I should just pack my bags and go. Then you'll hear this happens over and over. It's a theme. She will kick him out, but then she'll claim he's a runaway and he must come back. Inconsistent. So he called Rentis and says, I don't feel safe at home because my mom still has her gun and because she's threatened me before, and now we're fighting or arguing. That night, on November 12th, the deputies decide that it's best if Colin go with Susan, his grandmother. He's separate from his mom, which I think you'll hear from the sheriff's deputies is kind of what they think would be best for everyone, is to just not have Colin and his mom living together. But Kathy is insistent that he continue to live with her, despite her knowing what he has said. And remember, he has said, if she attacks me, I will defend myself. If she threatens me, I'm afraid of what might happen. So Susan picks Colin up on November 12th. She brings him to Auburndale, which is she teaches, and her in-person teaching job is here in Polk County. So that is her main residence, is Polk County. But that's a 55 and older community. You're not supposed to have kids there for very long. You've got Kathy yelling, demanding that Susan bring her son back. You can't steal him from me, even though this is a resolution to the argument that Colin and Kathy had, and that Colin is saying he doesn't feel safe with his mom. At any rate, next day, Susan, who is a trooper, brings Colin back to his mom. Best decision? Probably not, but I don't think you can ever know what other people are going through when you're not going through it yourself. So she brings him back to Kathy, and they're all together in the home. And Susan will tell you quite honestly that she doesn't remember if it was this day or another day, because there were many days like this where she took Colin and then Kathy insisted she bring him back. And then Kathy would go on a tirade against Colin when he came back. It may have happened this day, it may have happened another day, but Susan will tell you that Kathy punished Colin. Because even though sheriff's deputies had mediated this, Susan's going to take him for the night, let everybody cool down, that when Kathy started insisting that Colin come back to her, and he's 16, doesn't have a driver's license, doesn't have a car at this point, and he's with his grandmother. And apparently grandmother, Susan, didn't bring him back quickly enough to Kathy's liking, but Kathy punishes Colin. Susan will tell you she saw Kathy make him do a whole bunch of push-ups and holding weights above his head. And then she whipped him with a belt in front of Susan. And Susan said, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's going too far. And Kathy says, no, it's not, because Corporal Rentis said I can discipline him any way I want. Which isn't true, by the way. But so Susan, the walking on eggshells that she has done for years with Kathy, can't do much about it, she feels. Later that same day as they're eating, Kathy is, these are Susan's word, reading Colin the Riot Act about this is how it's going to be. This is what you're going to do. You have to listen to everything I say because Corporal Rentis says it's okay. Susan thought she was being way too harsh. And I realize parents differ in how they treat kids. That's fine. And Colin did stand up and say, let's just do this. Now, Colin told the police, because they did get involved, this is when he got arrested, that his mom kept telling him to shut up and he wouldn't shut up. And you'll see some examples of that on the Ring video. Colin would talk back. Best decision? Obviously not. But he says that when he wouldn't shut up, his mom hit him in the face, punched him in the face. So he grabbed her and did a wrestling move where he basically flung her to the ground. He fully admits that. He says that while he was doing that, he kneed her in the stomach. Okay? He never denied doing that. At any rate, Susan says when he stood up and said, let's do this, she went to get her phone to call Rentis to try and mediate. And next thing she knew, they were both on the ground. She didn't see Kathy punch him, but she also said it's entirely possible it happened based on her knowledge of her daughter and how she behaves. So after she's on the ground, they're both on the ground, Colin gets up and leaves the house. Calls the police. That's how the police get involved. Colin calls them. And you'll see some of the body-worn camera footage from that night with Colin talking to the officers, being very forthcoming. The officers spent a lot of time talking to all three people. Colin ends up getting arrested for domestic violence battery. Kathy denies she ever put her hands on him. He is put in jail that night. And the next morning, when he's getting ready to be released from the juvenile detention center, they say, okay, get in the car with your mom. Because mom's there to pick him up. And Colin says, don't make me get in the car with her. If she attacks me, I'm afraid of what will happen. If she comes at me again, I'm going to defend myself. The law enforcement officer at the juvenile jail basically says, I don't like your attitude, get in the car with your mom. So Colin gets in the car with his mom, goes home, and she immediately starts making him do standing marches with weights above his head. And you'll see that on body-worn camera footage, because while the personnel at the jail forced Colin to get in the car with his mom, even though he said he didn't feel safe with her, they did call the sheriff's office and say, by the way, I had a kid that said he might kill his mom, which is not what happened. Well, I wasn't concerned enough about it to not let him get in the car with his mom, but I'm calling you, can you guys go check? So all these sheriff's deputies troop up to the house. Kathy opens the door, come in, and you see Colin doing this with weights above his head, and the officers separate them and speak with each one. Kathy's saying he beat the shit out of me last night. This is his form of discipline. He's been doing it since he got home from the jail. Colin is outside talking to the detectives, once again, being very forthcoming. He says, my mom thinks I'm going to hurt her, that I want to hurt her. I don't want to hurt her, but if she comes at me, I'm going to defend myself. Guess what happened that day? Colin gets Baker acted again. So, Colin's back in a psychiatric facility for the statements that he made about, I don't feel safe with my mom. If she comes at me, I'm afraid I'll do her harm. Meanwhile, Kathy is calling Corporal Rentis and Detective Zanoniani, all upset that Colin got taken away from her. And then she starts making suicidal statements to them. So they send other deputies to the house, and Kathy gets Baker acted for threatening suicide. So all is not well at home, clearly. After Colin was arrested for domestic violence battery, Susan, his grandmother, hired him a lawyer named Jeff Ratkin down in Charlotte County to represent him in those criminal charges. Kathy is back and forth about what she wants to happen. Sometimes she wants the charges dropped. Sometimes she wants Colin to get diversion. Sometimes she wants him to, get the books thrown at him. Jeff Ratkin realizes that this is not a good situation. So he crafted what's called a 751 agreement. And this is an agreement between Kathy and Susan that allows for concurrent custody of Colin. And you'll see the legal paperwork. It was signed and notarized by Kathy and Susan and Mr. Ratkin. It was filed with the courts. The court ordered this concurrent custody agreement, meaning that Colin could be with either Susan or Kathy. Each one of them could make medical decisions for him. Each one of them could enroll him in school, that they had equal authority over Colin. And the idea was to kind of give everybody a break and respite. Kathy sometimes misinterprets that concurrent custody agreement. You'll see in some of her text messages or hear her on Ring video leaving messages for other people or talking to them. The agreement says that you can only have him if I'm mentally incapable of taking care of him or if I'm physically incapacitated, which is not true. You'll see the paperwork. At any rate, she has this very ambivalent, is a very tame term, very ambivalent feelings about whether Colin should be with her or not with her. And over the next few months, so December 2023 into the first few months of 2024, there is a lot of back and forth, meaning Colin goes between Susan and his mom. Meanwhile, he's still going to school and everything and keeping up his grades. You'll hear from Susan that Kathy would alternately kick him out again, say, get out of here, I don't want you here anymore, and then demand that he come back, even when he didn't want to. Several calls over the months from a variety of people, from Susan, from other family members, from Jeff Ratkin, saying that Kathy is suicidal. She has a gun in the house. She's threatened to kill herself. She actually does overdose a time or two. So that's what's going on in those months. In February, and it's going to be unclear exactly how all this occurs, but DCF gets involved again. Colin repeats that he doesn't feel safe at home with his mother. This is, after he tells them, I'd rather be in DCF custody. I'd rather be in foster care. I'd rather be anywhere but at home with mom. I'm scared. DCF wants him to live full-time with Susan. Kathy will not have it. Detective Zanoniani is saying, all these people have intervened and tried to come up with a solution. Kathy will not have it. Come up with a solution. Kathy will not have it. Somehow, Colin ends up back with mom, but because he doesn't feel safe, he runs away again, telling everybody, I don't feel safe. Law enforcement gets involved again. They find a gun in the home, which Kathy had lied to them about and said, oh no, I gave it to somebody else for safekeeping. Oh no, there's a gun there. She also claims that Colin attacked her again to law enforcement. She said he was trying to run away and he battered me. So the sheriff's deputies look at her Ring video and they're like, there was no battery. She tried to step in front of him and block him from leaving, escaping the situation, and may have brushed by her. That's what she was calling a battery and trying to get him arrested. But then she would have probably demanded he come back home with her. Needless to say, much chaos. In March, in what I hope is a little bit of positive news in all of this, Colin gets his driver's license and he gets a job at Domino's. And he did get a car. Kathy didn't buy him the car like she wants everybody to believe. It came from a trust that existed separate from Kathy. He's still going back and forth between Susan and Kathy, managing to accomplish things as a 17-year-old, 16 and 17-year-old. And then we get to the end of August, beginning of September of 2024. And you'll see a text from Kathy in the end of August saying to her mom and to other people, I'm going into that dark place again. My therapist thinks I should go to a facility for at least a few days, but she doesn't. September 7th, you heard about the whole bookshelf thing. There was, in fact, an argument over whether Colin would help her put up a bookshelf. And he is not being entirely respectful to her when he says, it'll take too long, I have to go to work. Also, there aren't studs on that wall. If we put it up there, it's going to fall and it's probably going to hurt someone. So did he help her put up the bookshelf? Absolutely not. Should he have? Maybe, but he didn't. And this is Kathy's reaction, and you will hear her words and see her. Get out and don't come back. Even if you're bawling your eyes out. And give me the keys to the house. So Colin's gathering. He goes out the door. You may or may not see her opening the door kind of and then closing it and locking it with his keys to the locked house inside. So Colin, being kicked out again, calls Susan, who is a concurrent guardian. By the way, Colin had been put on probation for the domestic violence battery, and a probation officer's name is Monique. You'll hear about her. And the court had said that even though most of the time you're not allowed to go out of the county when you're on probation, unless you're with a parent, it's okay for Colin to go visit his grandmother in another county. Just got to let Monique know. Okay. So Colin emails Monique, says, I'm going to my grandmother's. Called his grandmother, said, Mom kicked me out. Can I go to your house? She said, sure. She says, I'm in the Keys right now, but I'll be there tomorrow. Okay. So it wasn't like he was secretly going to this place where he can have a rager. This is something that has happened multiple times. So he drives to Polk County. You'll hear from the neighbors that his car got there on Saturday and did not move. So meanwhile, Kathy is getting worked up, to say the least, angry. I think one detective may describe her as manic. She starts in the early morning hours of Sunday the 8th, making repeated calls to Susan and to Colin, and will beg, plead, yell, cuss, call people names. She calls her mom a fucking moron. She is all over the place, insisting that Colin come back home. But at the same time, she'd say, I reported the car stolen because the car is not in your name, it's in both our names, and you're not allowed to drive that car. But you better get in that car and come right back home. But wait, I took money out of your bank account, so you can't even afford to put gas in it, but you better come back home. Get in that car and come back home. I'm going to sell the car. I sold the car. I'm already up in Auburndale. I found a buyer whose aunt lives in that community and who gave me the gate code so I could come into the neighborhood in Auburndale, and I couldn't see the car at Susan's house. You're in big trouble because I already sold that car. She was nowhere near Auburndale. You'll see the ring video. She was at her home. But she made up this elaborate story about having gone to Auburndale, gotten the gate code from the buyer's aunt, and going in and not seeing the car when the neighbors were like, the car never left. She is doing everything she can to get Colin to come home. She calls law enforcement, Detective Zanoniani and Corporal Rentis. There's no secret that Colin is in Auburndale and that his grandmother has okayed it. It's okay with his probation officer. Everybody tells Kathy, let him stay in Auburndale. Let him stay in Auburndale. Let him stay in Auburndale. Kathy claims on one of her phone calls that the police gave her 24 hours of Colin being gone until she was going to get in trouble for him being a runaway. No. You'll read her texts, you'll listen to her messages. Despite everyone telling her, let Colin stay in Auburndale, she wasn't having it. She was the one who was angry. You'll hear Colin's voice when she says, are you coming home or not? No. Which is what law enforcement, Susan, and everybody recommended, is that he don't go home. She went to him. She went to where he was safe. And the neighbors that you heard about will tell you that she came in hot and angry, that she sped into this quiet 55 and older community, whipped her car into the driveway, whipped it back out, pulled in front of the house, got out, slammed the door, and marched up to the carport door. Colin was never in the yard where her earbud was. She went up to the house and went in the house, angry. Within a few minutes, Kathy comes back out of the house, unlocks Colin's car, and starts throwing all of his stuff into it. And then after she's done throwing his stuff into it, you'll hear the neighbors say that she was yelling and shaking her fist, and it looked like she was the one who was being aggressive, and that Colin was standing in the doorway. So there's a door that goes into the living room and out to the carport, and that he was standing in the doorway. And when she comes up and you'll hear varying terms. You'll hear that he put his hand on her shoulder by where her ponytail was and kind of brought her inside. I don't know that you'll hear a neighbor say that he dragged her from the yard by her ponytail, by her hair. They will say that they heard her yelling. You can evaluate whether you think Colin was doing anything at that point to harm her. That's going to be part of your decision. Or if you think he was trying to avoid her making a scene in the community where teenagers aren't supposed to be living, you'll hear from the neighbors that they had seen Colin there before. He was never a problem. He would visit Susan because, like I said, he went back and forth, but they had never seen Kathy there before, ever. So Kathy and Colin go back into the house, and it's about an hour later, Colin calls 911, crying, upset, saying, we got in a long fight. My mother's bleeding out. Please send someone right away. When first responders get there, she was already dead. What you're going to have to decide at the end of all this, and by the way, Colin has wounds too, is whether the state has proved to you beyond a reasonable doubt that what they claim happened, that Colin somehow planned this. He's been plotting it for months, that he murdered and dragged his mom into the house that she went to where he was safe to kill her, or whether what Colin had been saying he was afraid would happen and that had happened in the past actually was what occurred. His mom came to him, went into the house where he was safe, and attacked him, and he had to defend himself. And that he is not guilty of the murder or the kidnapping of his mother.
All right, our first witness up was Laura Ellis. She's with the Polk County Sheriff Forensics Investigation. She's a CSI, basically. She did say that the weapon caused a large gash in the mother's neck. And, of course, they showed the crime scene photos to the jury, but we didn't get to see them. They discussed bruises on Kathy's body. And she also said that in Colin's vehicle, because she did have to go search it, they found a prior mock trial for his school. And they did discuss it, but I don't really know if it was really that relevant. Next up, they had the witness who was from Oklahoma. Now, this witness was very limited in what he could say. He did work at the father's crime scene. He no longer works with that department. In fact, it looked like he was released or fired from the department. I'm just going to play a really quick portion of his testimony because, like I said, it was They talked about his testimony longer than he testified. It was just, they were so scared that he was going to mention who the person that was unalived was.
Thank you. Officer Hyde, may you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your name for the record?
My name is Christopher Hyde, spelled CHRISTOPHERHYDE.
And where are you employed?
I'm employed as a police officer with the Iowa Tribe Police Department.
And what state is that in?
That is in Oklahoma.
And how long have you been employed in law enforcement?
Approximately 8 years now.
Now, I want to direct your attention specifically to February 14th of 2023. Were you working for the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office as a deputy on that date?
I was.
And did you respond to a homicide scene within your jurisdiction?
Yes,
Were you one of the first responders?
I was.
Were you able to determine through your investigation that the deceased individual had been shot 2 times?
That is correct.
Were you able to determine that 1 gunshot wound was to the chest and 1 gunshot wound was to the head?
Yes,
Through your investigation, were you able to determine that the defendant here in court is the individual who shot the deceased?
yes,
Now, the person that you saw that day, do you see them in court today?
I do.
If you recognize them by something they're wearing, could you state that for the record and perhaps point to the individual?
The defendant is seated at the defense table in a gray suit jacket.
Your Honor, the record will reflect Officer Hyde has identified the defendant. And is it a fair statement that the defendant was not charged for that killing in Oklahoma by the prosecutor's office?
That is correct.
And was the defendant arrested for that?
He was.
All right, Officer Hyde, I have no further questions.
Ms. Ross,
No problem.
is the witness released?
He is, Your Honor.
The next 2 witnesses were 2 women who separately lived in the mobile home. It was a 55 and older mobile home park. It was a really nice park that the grandmother lived in. They both saw Colin and Kathy arguing before the homicide. So they saw them outside of the trailer. And one of them actually witnessed him pull her back in. Maybe both, but I think for sure one definitely saw her being pulled back in by Colin, by her hair. As the mother was trying to leave, he wasn't going to allow the mom to leave. So that's really key, because that is the piece where the state is charging him for kidnapping. And I do believe it's going to make a big difference on how the jury deliberates this. Because throughout this trial, things got so off par with how the defense just kept bashing. It was the constant victim blaming. It felt as if the mother who had been unalived in this case was actually the one who was on trial. It really did. It got that heavy, and nobody reeled it back. The prosecutor probably didn't object enough, and the judge never said anything. The next, they called up the first deputies to arrive on the scene. They were the 5th and 6th witnesses of the day. And during one of these officers, they did play the 911 call that Colin made after the incident. Interestingly enough, Colin could sit through all of the photos, the graphic images that were shown throughout the entire trial on crime scene and through the from the medical examiner. But for some reason, he could not sit through and listen to the 911 call. It is a bit muffled. It's the best we've got, so let's listen in.
2nd, September 8, 2024. 911, what's the address of the emergency? Hampton, Florida. I don't know the fucking, I don't know the secret address. My mom is talking to EMS now. She's bleeding out. Please help. Your mom is doing what? My mom's bleeding out. She's bleeding out. Okay, what's the address, or where do you think you are? What road are you off of? What road crosses that road? So they Hampton in Florida. You go through the gate and you take the first right, and it's a house with a black dead out front. I'm trying to get it. Hampton Inn? Hampton Inn, yes, ma'am. What city is it in? It's Lauderdale. I can get it to you. I Okay, okay, you called 911, so we're gonna send an ambulance. He doesn't have time, he's leaving it, he keeps fucking bail, he doesn't have time, he needs to go now. Okay, and I'm using the address I see you at, is that right? Is that where you are? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Well, what can I do? I have your price up here, something about it. What do I do? Help is being sent. Stay on the line so I can get more information for the responders. I don't. Okay, help is being sent. Okay, medical help is being sent. She's bleeding out. Where is she bleeding from, sir? She's bleeding from the neck, ma'am. See, this is my mother. Are you with the patient now? I'm with her now. How old is the patient? She's 39 years old. She has a heart condition. She has a is she awake? No, she's unconscious. She's not with her. Okay. Is she breathing? No, she's not. I don't think she's alive. Okay, where is it? And you said neck. Okay. All right, listen to me. I'm sending the paramedics to help you now. Stay on the line, I'll tell you exactly what to do next. Okay, listen to me. Are you by her now? I am by her, yes. Okay, listen carefully. Lay her flat on her back on the floor and remove anything under her head. Okay, she's good. She's good. I did it right now. Okay. Listen carefully, and I'll tell you how to do chest compressions. Make she is flat on her back on the ground. Place the heel of your hand on the breastbone in the center of the chest, right between the nipples. Put your other hand on top of that hand. Let's take off the shirt. Just make sure she is flat on her back on the floor. Place the heel of your hand on the breastbone in the center of the chest, right between the nipples. Put your other hand on top of that hand. Okay. All right, pump the chest hard and fast, at least twice per second and 2 inches deep. Let the chest come all the way up between pumps. We're going to do this until help can take over. Count out loud so I can count with you. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. 1 moment. Okay, just keep going, okay? What caused the bleeding? Listen, what caused the bleeding? She got so tight and she was getting with another she fell on it. Where is the knife right now? And who did she get in a fight with? We got to for a long time. And he got on top of me and fell on it. Which is that? They keep attacking me. Yeah, I don't have it. I'll find it across the board. Where is the knife? I just put it across the floor with you. He is bleeding cold. He stopped bleeding. No more blood coming out. Watch it. Where did you throw the knife? You threw it to your right. It was totally away from you. Away from me. Where's your mother? I'm over her. I'm trying to save her. Where are you? Where's her? Where are you? I was in the kitchen, in the house, and the door is unlocked. Okay, you're with your mother, correct? Okay, Jimmy, listen to me, please. Stop, okay? Listen to me, and I'm going to tell you how to control the bleeding. Okay? Okay. All right, hold on. There's no more blood coming out of the wound. Okay, listen, okay? We're going to do this, okay? Okay, listen to me. Get a clean, dry cloth or a towel and tell me when you have it. My son is down low. Okay. Is the blood spurting or pouring out? Okay. No more. All right. Does she have a bleeding disorder or is she normally on blood thinners? No. Okay. I'm sending the paramedics to help you now. Stay on the line. I'll tell you exactly what to do next. Okay. Okay, I'm going to tell you how to stop the bleeding. Listen carefully and make sure you do it right. Get a clean, dry cloth or a towel and tell me when you have it. Now place it right on the wound and press down firmly. Don't lift it up to look. Without lifting the cloth up, please tell me if the bleeding is under control now. Yes, there's no blood. She lost all her blood. Okay, reassure her that help is on the way from now on. Don't let them have anything to eat or drink. It might make her sick or cause further problems. Don't move her unless it's absolutely necessary. Just tell her to be still and wait for help to arrive. Yes. Okay, listen, Judy, okay? Okay, we're gonna continue with CPR. Listen, Judy. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Listen, I need you to keep doing this. Listen, okay? I need you to keep doing this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Keep doing it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Are they there? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Are they inside? Hello? Okay, thank you. Thank you.
It's the defendant's grandmother, the victim's mother. I bet that is her sister right there. That was the oddest 911 call I think I've ever heard in my life. And like I said, they brought up deputies who responded to the scene, the first on the scene, and they told the details of what they found, which is pretty much what we went over, or what they went over. They also brought up the fire corporal. Throughout these testimonies, a lot of people were asked about Colin and his emotions, and he basically, many of them said he was just, his emotion was strange or blank, or there wasn't a lot of emotion. And of course, the defense tried to say, well, you know, you can't really say how someone's going to react in a situation like that. Going into day 2, the day started with a lot of discussion about the body cam footage that they wanted to be able to the day started with a lot of discussion because the prosecution wanted to show the body cam footage from the crime scene, and also prior body cam footage from when there was domestic calls at the home between the mom and the son. A lot of it that they wanted to bring in, they ended up not being allowed to, but they did get to see a few pieces of it. This is the forensic investigator, Bange. And during her testimony, I made a note that there was just no disputing the fact that he had done it. He said his mom fell on a knife, but come on, we know that she did not fall on a knife. She mentions how deep the wound is in her testimony. And she said that Colin was emotionless and he had blood on his hands and clothes and his glasses. One thing we learned from her testimony, however, was that when the paramedics came in, because he had blood all over his arms and hands, they were unsure whether or not he had any injuries. So the paramedics had washed his hands off a good bit. So when they took the crime scene photos, the way his hands were when they first arrived was not shown to the jury. She also mentions that there's blood outside on the step, and she was unsure whether or not it was tested. The defense asked that. She had arrived on the scene over an hour after the incident, and she had went inside. The EMS had already been there and disturbed the crime scene to save lives, of course. That's natural. The defense tried to paint the picture that Colin had blood on him from doing the CPR, not from anything else. They then brought up CSI Peters, and they showed the autopsy photos from the next morning. Obviously, we didn't get to see any of these because nothing that was shown in court could we see. We could hear some audio, but because of the way they had everything set up, there's no video of anything. The next witness was Sergeant Snyder. Now, he's no longer with the department, but he was a deputy at the time. He had 14 years of service. His testimony was key because in September 19th of 2023, he was in Punta Gorda at the Charlotte County Behavioral Center. And this is after Colin had been released from a Baker's Act. He was placed on Baker's Act after a domestic violence call. And in the call, he claimed that he was going to harm someone, whether it be himself or his mom or his grandmother. So they Baker Acted him. Now, whenever someone is released like that from a Baker's Act, there's officers involved, obviously, that are there with them. And he was going to be released into his grandmother's custody. This officer said that Colin made a beeline to him as soon as he arrived and said, "I need to be Baker acted again." And he said it was very unusual, and it was as if Colin had an agenda to stay at the center. They wanted to readmit him. He wanted to be readmitted, so they ended up readmitting him because he again claimed that he would hurt his mother. The defense said the behavioral center was releasing him to his mother, but that was incorrect. They said that several times, but that was incorrect. The grandmother was the one there they were releasing Colin to. Then Deputy Sharp came up. Deputy Sharp was part of the domestic violence call to the home. He said that Kathy was scared and she had injuries because Colin had kneed her and stopped on her hand at the time. He also said he discovered that the reason that Kathy was injured and that there was a call was because Mom was taking away Colin's Xbox. The grandmother was also there during this incident. Now, the defense tried to come in and say, well, didn't the mother punch Colin and start it? And the deputy said he did not see any marks on Colin whatsoever. Colin was arrested that evening, and the mother told the deputies that she did not want Colin there anymore. Then we get into Deputy Welsh. Deputy Welsh heard Colin say that he had unalived before and he would do it again. She heard all of this. I believe this was the same incident where he was being released from the Bakers Act at the behavioral center. And these were the things that he was saying. The defense said that Colin said he did not feel safe to go home. The defense did it again. They mentioned that he was going home with Mom and twisting the statement around because he was not going home with Mom. I tell you what, if I ever get in trouble for anything, I would want this defense attorney to represent me. She did a great job, I have to say. Detective Lacey Zanonian, I believe is the way they say it. She said that Colin said that he would harm or unalive his mother. She said that he said it multiple times. Now, this was with a detective that worked with him while he was at the behavioral center and after. So she was kind of like his go-to, or she oversaw the domestic violence case at all. She said that Kathy had said she would be willing, Kathy, the mother, she would be willing to die to spend time with her son because she had not been able to spend the last 3 years with him because he had been with his father. She said that Kathy was doing her best and Colin did not respect Mom and the rules. The defense tries to place blame on how Colin was raised and how he was brought up and Kathy's past, and they also brought up DCF involvement with family members. Kathy, at one point, had stabbed her husband, her ex-husband, which is Colin's dad, in front of the children. And to my understanding, the dad was very abusive. I say it like that because listening in, I don't know if I really got that strong sense from the prosecution. But they kept pushing on how Kathy was aggressive with the dad. Once again, the defense sat there and testified heavily during this woman's testimony. It was horrible. We were so angry watching this. It went on for quite some time. And she kept talking about how Kathy has tried to self-harm several times. It horrible parent. Why didn't they remove Colin from the house? That just doesn't make sense. So for us, it was kind of like, it was the defense attorney testifying and the detective just going, yes, no, I'm not sure. I wasn't aware of that kind of thing. And nobody ever called her on it. It was the strangest testimony. Then we're going to go on to witness 7, which was Sheriff Corporal Moore. She worked for the Juvenile Intervention Unit. Now, they did play some body cam footage while she was there, and the body cam footage was from November 13th of 2023 during the domestic violence call. During this time, while they were trying to figure out what they were going to do, they had put Colin in the back of the cop car while they talked to Mom. And he had his cell phone back there, and he was calling this other Corporal Rentis, who he had talked with before, and become, I guess it was like his point of contact. And I myself, I don't know if this is what the jury's going to think, but I myself just felt like he was calling Corporal Rentis and he was planting seeds because he knew he was going to end up doing this with Mom.
Objection.
Okay, so this is the body cam footage they were showing of him in the back of the cop car, but we can only hear it.
And before, as we get that queued up, was there some subject matter in which the defendant was talking about kind of two different personas, Colin 1 and Colin 2?
Yes, sir.
I'll say it to you like this, if you want to know. Colin 1 is, I guess, he's who just wants to survive, help people, and do good things in the world. And Colin 2 is the one that protects Colin 1 in situations where he can't escape from. And Colin 2 is the one that killed someone. But you're talking to Colin 1. Talking to Colin 1. The one who just wants to help people and just wants to.
So is that the cell phone that's visible on the defendant's lap?
Yes, sir.
And he's talking to Corporal Rentis?
Yes, sir.
That clip appears to be from November 14th, 2023 at 1:59 a.m.
I need to figure out exactly what you're scared of without having you be scripted and you give me some sense of stuff. Scared of going back in there, Rentis. Jesus, how many times do I got to say it? That's all I'm scared of. That's it. I'm fucking scared of that call. Yes, I am, Rentis, because what's it going to come down to next time? I don't think you're a pussy. I think that you are capable of killing your mother, but I don't think that you will. No, why would I let you get that? Do you think Colin will let you get that? I can't hear you, sir. Why call you strong that visual? Why would you submit in a roundabout way? True call, sir. When we talk about, it's the strongest version of me.
Did you hear Corporal Moore, the defendant, saying, yeah, he would, as it pertains to Colin 1, allowing him to kill his mom?
I did, sir.
I don't know how I'm going to react when she does that again. If I can control myself or how that's going to happen.
What do you think you might do to her
If she tries to hit me again, I might hit her back really, really hardly and badly.
You got hurt?
Yeah.
Okay.
For the record, that was not November 14th, 2023 at 3:22 a.m.
Yes, sir.
So at the end of that investigation, is it a fair statement the defendant was arrested?
Yes, sir.
The prosecution then called up Deputy Jankowski, and they played body cam of when Kathy, the mom, and Susan were in the living room with the cops. So I definitely want you guys to hear this.
When the investigation was kind of coming to an end, were you inside with Kathy Griffith and her mom, Susan Detman, in the living room area?
I was.
And were you asking certain questions that pertains to domestic violence within the household?
I did.
They were there for a long time because that first recording was 2 a.m. and the next one was at 3:22 a.m.
And before we play it, would this is it a fair statement that the defendant at this time is outside, either in the back of your patrol vehicle or somewhere else?
That is correct.
So the only two people present, civilian-wise, would be the victim, Kathy Griffith, and her mother?
That's correct.
A couple of quick yes or no questions I almost forgot before we go. And do you think he's capable of killing you? Does he have access to a firearm? And All right, any other questions before we? Okay. All right, well, thank you for your time.
So when you ask, do you think he's capable of killing you? Was her response yes?
Yes, it was.
And then in the back of your patrol vehicle, now as you return to your vehicle, did your body cam capture a little bit of a conversation between Susan Detman, who was standing outside of your patrol vehicle as she spoke with her grandson, the defendant?
It did.
Oh, good. This is good.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move State Exhibit 190 into evidence.
Why did you stand up? Why did you say? No, you didn't. You stood up and said, okay, let's do it. Let's do it. Yes, you did. I was there.
I was saying, well, I'm not this murder. I'm just trying to peacefully coexist and just figure something out. She kept telling me, shut up, but when I wouldn't shut up, she hit me.
No, that's not what happened, Colin. That's not what happened. You never said you wanted to peacefully coexist.
I've been saying that.
You said that in the car, but not there with her.
Now, Detective Danny Peters, he was the lead detective on the case, and they spent a good amount of time with him discussing Kathy and Colin's relationship. One thing we learned while he was on the stand was that Mom had installed some Ring cameras style things inside of the house. And in doing so, she did so because guys have to remember, her son had unalived the father. He came to live with her. She was on edge. She knew they were having problems. They were fighting constantly. He had threatened her before. She said flat out that it may kill me, but I'm going to be with my son. So that is why she went with the different security measures that she did by having those inside the house. I don't think they were inside of his room. I think they were inside of like the living room and the kitchen area, which is one of the reasons why a lot of us speculate that he lured Mom over to grandmother's home for the incident to occur so that there was no body cam footage of what happened. Just a thought, just a little thought put in there. Now, they reviewed all of the Cellbrite reports, the social media photos, and there was a lot of arguing while he was on the stand as to whether or not they were going to allow certain things in as far as text messages with the previous attorney because they thought that they were attorney-client privilege. Went on for quite some time. But what they did while he was on the stand here is they played a lengthy video of the inside surveillance of the mom and Colin. Now, we all were like, while we were watching these, we felt like they were probably a little bit too long. Like, what's the point? And I think what it was leading up to is that the prosecutor was trying to show the mom's, you almost had to watch all of it to see how the mom was interacting with Colin, how she asked him to help her that day, how he declined to help her, then he leaves, then she gets mad because he left and didn't help her. So it was kind of like leading up to everything. And at first we really thought it was stupid that he was playing the whole thing. But the next day, when we got down to the nitty gritty of it, we realized it was smart for the prosecutor to play the whole thing, which that's going to take us over into day 4. When they came back on day 4, they were still arguing over whether or not they were going to allow some of this stuff to come in. It was just a lot of back and forth, a lot of sidebars. Many, many times the judge referred to Colin as a juvenile. However, he was being tried as an adult. So that was one thing that we could not understand why that kept coming up. Now, they brought up Dr. Fenton on this was day 3. He was the first witness to come up, and he did the autopsy on the mom. He said the knife went from one side of her neck to the back area of the other side of her neck, and that the tip was exposed on the other side. They asked if that required a lot of force, and he said, surprisingly, no, it didn't require as much force as you would think. Now, they did talk about what was in Kathy's system. He said that there was Xanax and amphetamine in her system, which could be like a cough syrup, antidepressant, Valium, or anxiety medication, that kind of thing for the Xanax. So nothing crazy was in her system. The defense attorney did try to catch him off guard on some things or try to push some narratives while she was questioning him. And the doctor did a really good job at not falling for the bait.
And so far as you know, there was no clothing or any object over the Catherine Griffith's neck to also provide, say, a layer of protection beyond her own skin.
I'm not aware if there was. Yeah, I didn't see any. I wasn't told about it.
You mentioned in your direct testimony that you can't say with any certainty what level of force was necessary to make this wound.
No, I can't give you a number. No.
And you said that but you are aware that there are some variables that can give us some information about the level of force.
Yep.
If you're looking at a spectrum from very little to a whole lot.
Yeah, they are, but from my point of view, it's the tip of the blade that really, once the tip of the blade overcomes the skin, the greatest resistance is from the skin.
Correct.
And once you get over that, you'd be surprised how little actually is involved. But that doesn't mean that the person wasn't using a lot of force. It just means I can't tell you.
Right, I understand. And in this particular case, the tip of the knife that that caused this wound was triangular in shape. Are you aware of that?
I don't believe the knife was shown to me. I wasn't brought the knife from memory, at least. Look, I've seen so many cases since in between. I might be missed, but I don't think. But I think I may have seen a photograph of the knife.
So, what is it? Your understanding that it was a triangular tip?
Yeah, like a typical kitchen large carving knife, I guess is what I would call it. Yeah.
And would you agree that that type of tip is actually geometrically speaking, is the easiest to penetrate the skin with?
Yeah, so that's a sharp tip, and that once it penetrates the skin, you don't anticipate much more force being required for it to continue in.
I want to ask you a question about the toxicology in this case. I know you personally did not perform the toxicology tests, but you received the results of the toxicology tests on Catherine Griffith's blood, right?
Yes, correct. We take the samples, they're sent to a toxicology laboratory. It's a whole different world. They live in a different place, but they're the ones who do the testing. It's up to us to do the interpretation.
Right, and in this particular case, while you didn't find that the toxicology results contributed to Catherine Griffith's death, there were some drugs in her system that you were at least concerned enough to note in your report, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I use the word concern. I'm kind of obligated to tell the truth, and if they're in the report, I've got to report that. I can't hide it. But there were 2 drugs present. That is correct.
Okay, what were the drugs?
One drug is called alprazolam. You might know it as Xanax, and the other drug is amphetamine.
Do some of those side effects, although they might be rare, include racing thoughts?
Yeah, it's like any drug. No drug is perfect. Some drugs, they can have strange side effects. It's true. Can Xanax cause the opposite almost of what it's designed to do? Like any drug, that can happen. It would be very rare, but it can happen.
What about agitation? Can Xanax cause agitation?
Oddly enough, it's paradoxical. It's given for agitation, so why would it be causing that? In very rare cases, it's been known to happen.
And what about risk-taking behavior? Can it also cause that?
Risk-taking behavior. What do you mean by risk-taking behavior?
That's just what the literature said. That's the term I'm asking about. And it can be interpreted many different ways.
Yeah, it can. Yeah. It is a drug. It is a drug that's commonly abused, I suppose. So if people are using it in an abusive manner, that's not the medical reason why they were taking it or the reason why they're prescribed it. So I'm not sure what risk-taking behavior is, but it can be abused or misused.
You have no idea whether Catherine Griffith had a valid prescription for Xanax.
I do not.
The amount that was in her blood could have been well above a therapeutic dose that a doctor would prescribe, correct?
Tricky one to answer,
Yes.
because Xanax is, like most other benzodiazepines, is a drug that's subject to what's called tolerance. What does that mean? Simply put, if any of you drink alcohol, you probably noticed that the first time you drank alcohol, it had a certain effect on you. But as you continue to drink, get older, you seem to need more of the alcohol to get the same effect. That's tolerance. So you need more of the drug for it to do the same thing. Xanax is certainly prone to that. So looking at a blood level in a post-mortem setting doesn't tell you a lot about whether that person was taking too much or it's had an effect on them, or this could be her normal. This could be just the amount she needs to have to be on a steady keel. Maybe it was a lot higher in the day. This is just a snapshot of what we caught. There's also another reason to make it complicated for you. I mean, it does take a while to get through all of this. There's a thing called post-mortem redistribution, okay? And that is a circumstance where if you take a certain drug or certain drugs for long enough in your life, you would think that they go in, circulate around your blood, and then the body gets rid of them. Not true, right? If you take certain drugs long enough, the body goes in, circulate around the blood, and then there's part of them are stored, sequestered, like a jury is sequestered in a room, and they're not available to the body, but they've dissolved in the fatty tissues, or they've dissolved in other compartments of our body, which is water, fat, protein, and so on. And then after death, when you die, those stores are released and they go back into the blood. Some of them do. So sometimes the blood result you're looking at is actually higher than it would have been when she was alive, or anybody who's alive. So it's another factor we have to take into account. And Xanax is one of those drugs. So depending on how long and how much she was taken, this 27 could be a little higher than what it would have been at the time of her death. But in any event, it is not at a level that would concern me that it participated in her death, that it would have impaired her beyond some extraordinary means. It's almost, if you're doing enough of these cases long enough, 27 is not high, and it wouldn't concern me personally.
Okay. But it could be above a therapeutic dose that a doctor prescribed to her.
Yeah, so again, for the same reason I've just explained,
Yeah.
therapeutic, we can't use the terms therapeutic because we're not dealing with a therapeutic situation because it's post-mortem. And secondly, I don't know how much she's been prescribed or how much she's taken.
Been prescribed.
Or even if she is
Right.
being prescribed, correct. I don't know that.
Okay, so then let's go to the amphetamine. What is amphetamine?
So amphetamine is a stimulant drug. It's belonged to the amphetamine class. It's a subclass of another division of drugs called the phenylethylamines, of which that's an entirely large family. But the amphetamines have been around for quite a while, maybe late 1800s, early 1900s. They really became into their own in probably World War II, when the German army figured out that by giving them to the soldiers, that they needed less food and they could stay awake longer because they were running out of men. So they needed the few men to have. So they were given, Hitler famously was partly one of the many drugs he was taking was an amphetamine. So they've been around a long time.
So basically it's what some people refer to as speed or an upper.
It's an upper, it's a stimulant. It activates the nervous system to reduce tiredness or appetite and to stimulate the sensation of being awake.
Which is sort of the opposite of what a benzodiazepine or alprazolam is designed to do.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Amphetamines can cause side effects such as erratic behavior.
Yes.
And sometimes even violence.
Any stimulant can be associated with violent behavior in certain people at certain times, yes.
And Catherine Griffith had both amphetamines and alprazolam in her blood.
Yep, the amphetamine is reported at less than 0.1 milligram per liter, which is about 100 nanograms per mil. It's a very, very low amount, but it's there.
When Deputy Christopher Ellis came up on the stand, they did play the body cam footage of the police department's visit to the home again for one of the domestic violence things. And I'm actually going to, I'll see how the audio is. I might add it into this video if the audio is really bad. If you want to go back and look, I have a video for this specific body cam footage that's marked that it's body cam that you might want to go back and look at if you don't want to just listen.
In a white truck, 20 Gold Front Corridor with Catherine and Griffith, teacher, Victoria, for Dallas 9 for 2591.
Hello.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good. Is Colin home?
Yeah, you guys can come on in. He's doing standing marches. He's not a happy camper right now. You can get your marching bells on.
What's up, man? What are you doing?
He's doing standing marches as a form of discipline ever since he got home. I have that right there recording it so you can see everything. I'm sorry? Do what? Just so you know, it's being recorded because as soon as he got home, I had to start doing standing marches.
Is that working?
I mean, he beat the shit out of me last night, so
Right.
this is his form of discipline for.
That's something for a judge to decide.
Okay. Can we,
Yeah, we'll go
just gonna talk to him alone, okay? I wanna talk to her, we'll just figure out what happened.
Yes. So what's going on, man? Last night, me and my mom got into a physical altercation. I got arrested for domestic battery, but when it comes to judge today, I have right to public defender and see how that goes.
Okay. So how is the situation with you and mom right now? Things calm down?
No,
you guys
no,
everybody get along? Where are we at?
No, sir, it's not good. She thinks that I do yell at her. I don't. She thinks that I'm like psychotic, like literally psychopath, sociopath, something like that. I don't know exactly where she's at. She thinks I'm gonna kill her. I want to kill her. That I want to beat the shit out of her.
Do you?
No, sir.
Okay.
I don't want to hurt anyone, let alone my mom. Even despite this happening, but I'm not gonna take what I consider abuse when someone's attacking me. And
how is she attacking you?
When she attacked me, when she threw a punch at me and grabbed on me, I grabbed on her back. I got her off of me. She hit the ground, and then I fled and called Rentis, and then he sent someone out.
You called who?
Rentis, Detective Rentis.
Okay. So basically, what we came back is when the jail was releasing you to your mom this morning. Was there anything said then?
Yeah, I said that I didn't really feel safe there with myself and with her, and that I didn't know what was going to happen. I still don't know what's going to happen.
As far as what?
Her attacking me or her doing something to herself or me.
Okay, what about you doing something to her? Are you able to control yourself?
I'm in a constant state of fight or flight, and I don't know. If I think she's going to do something, even if she's not, I might act. I'm not going to go crazy or anything, but I'm not sure, honestly. Okay.
You're not sure if you're going to hurt your mom?
Only just hurt me.
Okay. Did you make any statements saying that you were going to kill
No,
your
sir.
mom
No,
if
sir.
you got in the car with her?
No, sir.
I'm trying to figure out why we would have a corporal at the jail that took you out, that dropped you off with your mom and was telling us that you said, "Don't put me in the car with her. I'm going to kill her."
Yeah.
Was that said?
I did not say I was going to kill her. I did not say kill. I don't know why he sent me back here. I asked him not to, but he said he didn't like my attitude and that I just want something like that. But his words not.
Okay. What we're trying to figure out, we just want to make sure we do everything we can to prevent anything happening.
Sir, given situation, I don't think that we should be in the same house at all.
Everybody else, at the conclusion of your interaction with the defendant, did you Baker Act them on that same shortly thereafter?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Ms. Thornhill?
When you first walked in to the home, Colin was standing with 2 weights over his head and doing marching in place, correct?
Just one.
Just 1 weight?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, sorry, 1 weight. And Kathy Griffith had indicated to you that she had been making him do that since he got home from the jail, right?
Yes, ma'am.
If Colin had wanted to kill her, unprovoked, unattacked, he could have hit her in the head with that weight that he was holding over his head, couldn't he?
It's possible.
He could have done something while they were driving home in the car together, right?
Possible.
But he didn't do any of those things that you're aware of.
Yes, ma'am.
And he told you repeatedly that he didn't want to do anything to his mom, but that if she attacked him or if she came at him, that he would do something in response to her attacking him, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Redirect.
Deputy Ellis, would it be smart to murder someone in a house that's got video cameras in every room?
No.
I don't have anything further here.
Is the witness released?
Boom. I guess she told him. They then brought up Detective Peters back to the stand, and he was up there for quite some time. And we listened to the remaining portions of the footage and the surveillance inside of the home. And this is at this point, Colin had already left and he had headed over to his grandmother's. He was at his grandmother's, and Kathy was very upset. It was a long period. It's a long video that we were listening to. So I'm not going to play it on this particular video because I was trying to keep this kind of short and sweet for y'all. But I do, if you want to go to day 2 and day 3, I have it marked when Detective Peters was on the stand. All of my videos are time stamped, so you can go and find that and listen to that there. Okay. Now we're going to move on to day 4. Ugh. Day 4 was when grandmother was questioned. You guys, this was awful. This was awful. This was the victim's mother and the defendant's grandmother up on the stand. I've never been in her position. I guess we shouldn't all be judging her for this, but it just, I'm going to let you listen to this and you can draw your own conclusions from it. It was very odd behavior. It's also important to note here that at this point, this was day 4. Prosecution had just rested, and this was the one and only witness that the defense has called.
Ms. Detman, will you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell both your first and last name?
Susan Gutman. Susan is S-U-S-A-N, and Gutman is G-E-T-H-M-A-N.
Ms. Detman, how are you related to Colin Griffith?
I'm his maternal grandmother.
So your daughter was Kathy Griffin?
Yes, ma'am.
Griffith, sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So give the jury a little bit of an idea of who the other members of your family are. Who was Kathy's father?
Robert Willantis.
Were you married at some point to Robert Willantis?
Yes, we were married for 19 years.
When did you divorce?
We divorced in 1998.
After you divorced Robert Willantis, did you get remarried?
Yes, I did.
Who did you get remarried to?
Inaki Markovich.
Okay, and might need to spell that last name. Ms. Detman, who are your children from your marriage to Robert Willantis?
John Paul Willantis, Kathy Willantis Griffith, and Christy Willantis Rooney.
Did you list them in ascending order of age, youngest to oldest?
I've been youngest to oldest.
Okay. Do you have another child?
Yes, I do.
Who is that?
Kevin Markovich.
And that's from your marriage to Mr. Markovich?
Yes.
Now, Kathy, obviously Colin was Kathy's son. Did she have any other children?
Yes, she had an older son. He's still alive, Christopher Ray Griffith.
How old is he?
He is 24.
I want to ask you a few questions about Robert Willantis, your ex-husband. When you divorced in 1998, who got custody of your 3 children with him?
I did.
And since 1998, has Robert Willantis been a big part of your life?
No, except for the custody battles we went through.
What about, are you aware of his relationship with any of the 3 children that you had with him?
He didn't have a relationship once he was not granted custody of John Paul. He didn't want Kathy, considered Kathy to be damaged goods. He only sued for John Paul.
Okay, but what was his relationship like with his children after the divorce?
He didn't have a relationship at all until Kathy divorced and she reached out to her dad.
When did Kathy divorce her husband and the father of Colin and Christopher?
2019, if I remember correctly. It was like December of 2019 when they filed. And I think it took a couple months for the divorce to actually take place.
Okay. Now, we saw pictures of Robert Willantis on a trip with Kathy. Tell the jury about that trip, what you know about it.
So Kathy wanted to meet the biological Robert's mother, the biological grandmother, because he had many medical problems. So she asked me, she said, Dad said he'll take me to California to meet his mom. They lived in Anaheim. The mom lived in Anaheim, California, but you'll have to pay for it. And I said, okay. I said, just please try not to do anything too expensive. And I'll see what points I can use for the hotels. And fly over there. You guys don't need to rent a car. You can use your dad's car if it can make it to California. If not, then we'll get a rental car.
So, Ms. Detman, did you in fact pay for Kathy to go on this trip with Robert Willantis?
Yes. I paid for all the food, all the hotels, Disneyland, all of that.
And when was that trip?
That was before she got Colin back.
So before 2023?
Yes.
After 2019, though?
And after COVID was over with.
Okay.
So I believe it was 2022.
Are you aware of any other trips like that that Robert took with his other 2 children?
No, he didn't really have communication with them.
All right. So I want to ask about Kathy's funeral or celebration of life. Did the family hold such a thing for Kathy?
Yes, we had a celebration of life right here at the funeral home in Lakeland.
Was she actually buried or was she cremated?
No, she was cremated. She had conveyed to me as well as to her sister and brothers that she never wanted to be put in the ground. She wanted to be cremated and later taken back to the ocean in Key Largo and her ashes be put at the Jesus statue that we have under the water in Key Largo.
Has that been done?
No, we're going to do that this summer.
Where are Kathy's ashes right now?
Right now, they're at Christie's house.
Was Robert Willantis invited to the celebration of life?
No, he was not.
Why not?
Robert tends to be very disruptive. He has difficulty with truthful manners, and we just did not want to have more lies and disruption. The final time that we could say goodbye to Kathy.
I'm going to ask you some questions now that may also be difficult. In the last roughly 2 months before Kathy died, what personal medical things were you going through?
So in the last part of June, I was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. I had to have part of my colon removed and an ostomy put in place.
After you were diagnosed and had your surgery, did you have a fight with Kathy over Robert Willantis?
Yes, I did. Kathy was very adamant that she wanted Robert to take care of me, that I needed to pay for his flight from New Mexico to Lakeland, get a hotel for him for 2 weeks, and get some sort of a car, and even pay for his food. And I told Kathy, I said, that's ridiculous. He hates me. I don't want to be hurt by him. Plus, has lost his nursing license. I want a real nurse that has.
Okay, hold on.
I'm not just projectile, this collateral accusations.
Ms. Detman, as a result of you not wanting to follow Kathy's wishes as far as Robert Willantis coming here and taking care of you, did that cause a break in communication between you and Kathy?
Yes, she refused to talk to me. She blocked my phone. She told me if I came over to the house, she would have me arrested for trespassing. She said, you can contact Colin, but you can't contact me.
And that, okay, I'll move on from this. Mr. Willantis on the stand mentioned that Kathy got Colin a second phone, and that must have been what Colin used to talk with Mr. Willantis on the phone every week or every other week. Tell the jury what you know about a second phone.
The second phone, I purchased a second phone when Colin came to live with me in the January, February time period, the first time she threw him out. And I couldn't leave a kid in the double wide by himself without a phone. Plus, since I didn't
Wait, hold on. Why didn't Colin have a phone with him when he went to live with you in January of 2024?
Because Colin and I were at the Mexican restaurant in Port Charlotte. Kathy and Colin and I were supposed to go. When I got there, Kathy said, no, I don't want to go. And I said, come on, at least have some nachos or something. No, I don't want to go. And I said, can I take Colin with me? Sure. So while we were at the Mexican restaurant, she called me and she said, don't bring Colin back. I never want to see you or Colin again.
And the phone that Colin had at that point, where was it?
It was at Kathy's house.
Okay, so you brought Colin to
the double wide in Arvindale, and I didn't even have internet because, of course, I wasn't there all the time. So if I needed to, I'd hotspot my computer. I didn't want an extra expense for internet or cable or any of that. And so I realized I couldn't leave Colin here without a phone. So I told him, I said, we're going to have to go to AT&T and get a phone for you. And I even got a 786 area code because that's the area code that I have in the Keys.
And that second phone, did Colin have possession of it from January of 2024 all the way up until September of 2024?
No. He only had possession of it for that small amount of time from when he came to which would have been, it was either the end of January, the beginning of February. He had possession of it there, and then when he left, he took it, and I immediately got it. I got leave.
Okay, I'm actually going to show you what's been marked as defense exhibit number 16 and see if you recognize it.
I don't know if she is really reading from anything, guys. I think she's looking down when she's talking, but you can tell it's like she's trying to pull from her memory when she's speaking. So, yeah, it's very telling to the jury. Very scripted, very coached, which is horrible. Just get out there and tell the damn truth.
Look at that and see if you recognize.
All rise, please.
You talking about Colin laughing, Myron? Isn't that ridiculous?
Please be seated.
Ms. Stepman, I'm going to ask you about some specific instances and may ask you to describe a little bit about them. So starting with, are you aware of Kathy having pinned her then husband to the wall of the house with her running car?
Yes, ma'am, I know.
Okay. And were you present for that?
No.
Have you ever, are you aware if Colin was aware of that incident?
Yes.
He was aware.
Yes.
What about an incident where Kathy stabbed her then husband with a corkscrew and then burned him with a terrarium light? Are you aware of that incident?
Yes, ma'am.
And are you aware that Colin was present for that incident?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you aware of Kathy threatening to kill her then ex-husband's girlfriend's family in Homestead?
Yes, I am.
Are you aware that she actually started driving toward their house to follow through on her plan?
Yes.
Did you actually speak with her on the phone then?
Yes. I was telling her that what she was doing was crazy. She was going to get in trouble, that she couldn't take it out on 3 innocent lives in Homestead. She needed to turn around and go back home.
Are you aware if Colin was aware of that incident?
I'm not aware.
The incident where you said Kathy attacked your husband with a baseball bat.
Yes.
Are you aware if Colin was aware of that incident?
I'm not aware of that.
And have you ever personally witnessed Kathy engage in a physical act of violence towards Colin?
I know that there was a fight at the house in Port Charlotte, and the fight started because she was beating him with a belt and making him do push-ups, sit-ups, push-ups, and then holding a weight above his head while he was running in place.
We have to talk about some unpleasant things, but it'll be over soon enough. No problem. So, do you recall my last question?
Yes. You were asking me why I was spilling dirt on my dead daughter, and I said, I'm not. I said, I supported her. I've gone into massive debt in trying to ensure that she
I
had a,
appreciate that, but that was a few questions.
oh,
But-
you're talking about how Kathy ran away from the Hope House and they found her in the,
No, I'm not talking about that either, but if you listen to my question, it'll get easier. So we were talking about your daughter, that she was a very committed teacher and very committed to the youth of her classroom. And I mentioned that at a certain point, she even allowed one of her students to move into the household, and it was believed that Chuck had inappropriate relationship with this student. Are you aware of that? With a yes or no answer, we can start at that place. I'd appreciate it. Are you aware of that?
yes.
And you were not a big fan of Chuck, as it ended up being the divorce, correct? For how he treated her, from how he impregnated her as a child through the years, being physically, emotionally, and mentally abusive to your daughter. I can't imagine you were a fan of that, were you?
No, Robert was the one that was a fan of Chuck.
Now, ma'am, I understand that you hate your ex-husband.
I don't hate him.
Well, it sounds like you're throwing stuff about Robert in a lot.
You just asked me if I was a fan, and I wanted to tell you who in the family was. I knew Chuck from the
Your Honor.
time he was.
Stepman,
Oh, I'm sorry.
that's the point. He gets to ask the questions to elicit the information he's looking for. If additional information is needed, Ms. Thornhill or Mr. Hendry will make sure to address it. So just pay close attention to the question that's asked and try to answer just the question that's asked.
I apologize.
It's all right. Mr. Levine.
Appreciate it. Ms. Statman, as it pertains to your last piece of information that you provided, as it pertains to your husband, he hated Chuck for what Chuck did to his daughter, that being impregnating a little girl, correct?
I'm not object to developments and to speculation about what Robert thought about Chuck.
Sustain this to relevance.
All right, Ms. Detman, if I ask you a question that for your information, just please answer it irrespective of your feelings about your ex-husband, all right? Now, at a certain point, Kathy got divorced from Chuck, correct? After years of unthinkable abuse, correct?
Yes.
Now, let's move on to a different subject matter. When your grandson lived in Oklahoma with his dad for about 3 years or so, at the end of that, your grandson wanted to come live with Kathy and actually was able to, correct?
Yes.
And Kathy was very happy about that, correct?
Yes.
And she felt that she had missed out, understandably so, on multiple years of her son's life, correct?
Yes.
And she was trying to fix or make your grandson's life better.
She was trying to improve his lifestyle, yes.
Now, you described it as a fight in Port Charlotte where law enforcement came because you said your daughter was beating Colin with a belt that made him do sit-ups and push-ups. You remember that?
I did push-ups, and I took away the sit-ups. It was push-ups and putting the weights above his head and running in place.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Now, you remember talking to law enforcement when they came out there, correct?
Yes.
And giving a sworn statement because you just wanted both parties, your grandson and your daughter, you wanted everybody to be safe and healthy and happy, correct?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Detman, as to the root of what the issue was that night, do you remember telling the deputy that the three of you were at the dining room table and Susan had Colin seated down and Kathy told Colin that she would be implementing new parenting rules and Colin would be having his Xbox, his cell phone, and other items taken away as disciplinary action due to him being disrespectful to her. Do you recall telling law enforcement that?
I remember telling law enforcement about the Xbox would be, I don't know if it's taken away, but it was going to be restricted.
And at that time, your grandson didn't want to hear from his mom, and so he stood up and threatened to fight her and said, "Let's just do it." Correct?
That was after the incident with the exercising and belt, the beating of the belt. That's when Kathy wanted us to all sit down and eat sandwiches. Like it literally went from one extreme to another. Sit down and eat sandwiches, and then Colin got up from the table and said, "Let's just do it." And I went to go get my phone to contact Officer Rentis or Corporal Rentis or Officer Lacey.
Okay. All right. Very good. Now, you mentioned that you and your family members love to talk about how violent Kathy was. Is that right?
No, we didn't love to talk about how violent Kathy was. We talked about what we could do to help her. We didn't want her to lose her job. We didn't want her to be suicidal. And more than anything, we wanted her to try to get better.
Did you talk about how violent your grandson was?
No.
And why not? Weren't you concerned about that?
Objections.
Now, you were concerned about where the defendant would live, correct? In terms of who he might hurt, whether he lived with you and your husband, Nikki, or if he lived with Kathy.
My husband did not want Colin to live with us because he said that if Colin lived with us, Kathy would be over at the house and he didn't want to have to deal with Kathy.
Ma'am, didn't Nikki say he didn't want Kathy, he didn't want Colin to live with them because he was afraid that Colin might kill you or kill him?
No.
All right, now let's move on to the subject matter of kitchen knives or butcher knives. Do you tell the jury about the time when you noticed that there was a knife missing from your residence there in Auburndale, and you were trying to figure out who stole the knife or who took the knife?
Yes, there was a small knife with a blade like this that I bought at the dollar store, which is now like the $1.29 store, and it had a protective cover on it, and it wasn't in the drawer with the rest of the knives and silverware.
And did you find out eventually that your grandson had taken the knife?
Yes.
And he basically told you he just needed it just in case and did not elaborate on what he was going to do with it?
He said he just needed it.
Now, at that time also, Kathy made it explicitly clear to you that she was afraid that the defendant might hurt her, correct?
Not at that time, it was later.
And there was multiple times when Kathy let you know that she was afraid for your safety and for her own safety.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that a couple of things about the 7th and the 8th of September. You mentioned that Colin told you that he didn't have a phone with him on the 7th. Is that correct?
Yes.
Were you aware that he did have his cell phone with him and it was in his car?
So his cell phone had been turned off by his mother. She used to do that anytime she'd kick him out, she'd turn the cell phone off. In fact, it's in the records that she turned it off, and she turned it on, and she turned it off.
And you mentioned that the sliding door, that it had no lock on. Is that correct?
We had adapted the sliding door for a doggy door so Freddie could go in and out when he was staying in Auburndale, my acid house. And so we did not have a locking mechanism. You could close the door, but you couldn't lock it.
And so that's how you mentioned that your grandson was able to get into your house on the 7th?
Mm-hmm. Oh, plus the front door was burglarized and the burglars got in quicker that I could find my lock. I don't lock things.
Okay. Now, your response when this was going on, when law enforcement made contact with you, was that you didn't know that Colin was a psychopathic killer, correct?
I never said that. Never.
If I may approach, please, Your Honor. Ms. Dedman, we're almost done, all right?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Ms. Dedman, is it a fair statement that Kathy had expressed to you that she was getting very frustrated with the fact that your grandson wouldn't do his chores, was disrespectful, and was basically just taking his mom for granted?
Yes.
And when Kathy was communicating with you on September 7th and September 8th, that was the Saturday and the Sunday, she did so by both text messages as well as phone calls, correct?
Yes, sir.
And Kathy made it clear that she wanted your grandson home by 10 a.m. on Sunday, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then when that didn't happen, when 10 a.m. came and went, she still made it clear that she wanted your grandson to come home, correct?
Yes.
And Kathy mentioned that she wanted him home. She wanted him to go get work at Domino's from like 4 or 4:30 to 8 or 8:30 on Sunday, correct?
Yes.
And your grandson was working at Domino's, correct?
Yes, he was.
And so Kathy wanted him home so he could then go to Domino's that night, correct?
Yes.
And then kind of towards the end of the communications, then Kathy told you she was going to your house to get Colin to come home, correct?
Yes.
And she told you that either he could go home with her or he could drive, basically follow her in his car, correct?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for your time today, Ms. Dedman.
Okay, and that was pretty much it. Mom was the last and only witness for the defense, and they rest. Colin decided not to testify, and so now we wait for jury deliberations. Hopefully, I'll be able to get this out before that. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope this helped you, if you're not able to watch the full trial, for you to just see some of the key moments. Y'all have a blessed day, and I will see you very soon. Oh, y'all have a blessed day, and I'll see you at the verdict.